Hello, and again, thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, this discussion today. My name is Jessica Zavala, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health to today's webinar, Maximizing Your Performance Professionally and Personally by Focusing on Resiliency. Before I introduce today's presenter, I do have a few brief announcements to share. First and foremost, CME and CEU credits are available. The activity code for today's session is 67 Lily. That is 67 LILY. This code will expire on tomorrow, December 6th at 12 noon. Please be on the lookout for information, as you can see posted within the chat function, on how to obtain credits. Next, we invite you to join us as we kick off the new year with our first webinar in January, Increasing Behavioral Health Access, Implementing Step Care Models to Decrease Barriers to Use Resources Effectively. That will be on Tuesday, January 30th at 12 p.m. Dr. Nathan Dimmers from Mantra Health will join us. Please mark your calendars. You don't want to miss out on this discussion. Additional details regarding upcoming events can also be found on our website as well as social media. We also encourage you to post your questions and comments in the Q&A or chat function during today's presentation. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and the video will be made available for viewing on our YouTube channel. And now to introduce our presenter, who is no stranger to the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health. Dr. Mickey Sharma is Director of the Counseling and Consultation Service at The Ohio State University, where he specializes in the treatment of mental health issues of college and university students. Dr. Sharma has also spoken professionally regarding the mental health needs of students and assisting the community through trauma at various conferences and forums. His career has spanned service in several university counseling centers where he has worked as a clinician and operations and training administrator. Dr. Sharma has also served as president of the Association for University and College Counseling Center Directors. In addition, he has also previously served as a board member for the Association of Counseling Center Training Agencies and in the council position of disaster response for the Illinois Psychological Association. His special interest areas include trauma, multiculturalism, diversity, eating disorders, training, and supervision, to name a few. Dr. Sharma obtained his doctorate from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology, Chicago campus in 2008, and had also received the Distinguished Alumni Award from that institution. So without further ado, we welcome Dr. Mickey Sharma.
Thank you, Jessica, and good afternoon, everyone. It's after 12 o'clock, but if you're in a different time zone, it may still be good morning. So there was a question about slides. I'm going to share screen so you can see the slides, and Chris has copies of that. I think they may be going out to folks afterwards. So let me start with doing this. Share screen. And there we go. Should be live for everyone. I'm believing that you can see them. As long as no one is messaging me that you can't, then we're all good. So I'm going to go through the slides and the things I have to share with you, and then we'll save some time for question and answer, some discussion, Q&A at the end of our hour today. But, you know, the focus of today is about how we can maximize our own performance on both a professional and personal manner with looking at the concept of resiliency, and I'll share with you a model of resiliency and how we can most effectively do that. But I'm going to start out and talk about the impact of kind of the work that you do specifically within higher education and the impact that can have on you both on a professional and personal context. So Jessica gave you background on me. The only thing I would add to that, so it's really, I have spent the bulk of my career working in higher education because it's the practice setting that I'm most passionate about, and I've worked in a number of different university counseling centers. Spent the most of that time in administrative or leadership roles in higher ed and university counseling centers. I'm here at Ohio State, and this is year 13, so I've been here for a while. Those of you in Ohio before, I was down the road at Wright State University for over 8 years, so I've spent a good chunk of my career in Ohio, and as Jessica said, no stranger to this program. And the work has shifted in terms of working in higher education, and I'll talk about how that shift has happened over the last few years, certainly with the impact of the pandemic, but even over the last couple of decades in terms of what's happened and its impact on us as individuals. And I say individuals because we've shared about my bio and my professional work, but none of us are just professionals. We're also people, and you also have your own personal lives. We all have a story. And we have two boys who are college students. And so, in addition to being a counselor director, I'm also a father. And that's a significant, part of who I am as well. And so those are things, all those different things that happen, and all those things that we manage both personally and professionally that have an impact on the work that we do. But I think what I've seen across time and across the work in higher education is the amount of stressors that people are experiencing has increased over time, and it's had its impact in that way. So, at this point, we're going to start with a poll question. So, Chris, you want to make that live, and we'll take about half a minute. Just um, go ahead and respond to that. All right, Chris, can you share the results? There we go. All right. So if we look at that, we're going to see that when we look over the past year, um, if we look at you know, we've got 18, 14, about 30. So we're looking about 7 out of 10. We're finding stress on the job has increased a little, a lot, or maybe even, more than a lot when people are kind of that, losing it. But the point is that for many folks, not for everybody, but for a lot of folks, the amount of stress that you're experiencing on the job has gone up. So I think that what we're finding is when you're working in higher ed and when you're supporting students, there's been more challenges with what students are dealing with, what they're bringing to the table, what they're coming to your office with, what they're coming to campus with in terms of their needs. And oftentimes, I think most times, many times, this is not just about a student getting to campus and having struggles. They may have, many of them have had struggles prior to getting to campus and need support to be most successful once they've arrived on your campus. I mean, the data is clear when we look nationally that there are more students on campuses today who've had prior mental health treatment than there ever have been before. But I think that's a positive, meaning that higher education has become more of an option for more students, more people in our society. That's a good thing, but also means that's a resultant impact on those of us working in higher education in terms of having to provide that support for students. And many times we're talking about as we've evolved into that, back into that in-person support and the experience that they need. But the struggles that students have highlights how important the student support services are to get students from when they begin, when they arrive on your campus, through graduation to where they're going to launch their career or potentially move on to graduate or professional school. So if we look back at the last few years and the impact, I'm not going to say that pandemic is over, but we're certainly in a much different place today than we were in 2020, 21, 22. But I want to take a moment and talk about the impact of that on all of us. Certainly, in higher education, across society, culture, and the globe. So a way of looking at this is if we can, so this graph was made by Samsung. It's looking at the emotional phases of a disaster response. If we look, if we conceptualize uh, COVID and the pandemic as a traumatic experience, as a disaster, these 6 phases that I'll walk through with you will help us understand what you've experienced. So you'll see if you look on the left side, emotional low to emotional high. So phase one, so I'm going to go through these 6 phases talking about the COVID pandemic. The pre-disaster would be before anything has happened. So I'm taking you back to 2020. Think about January 2020. You're hearing about this, but it's across the world. It's not even in the US yet. And maybe you're not really paying a lot of attention to it. You're more curious, trying to understand what it is, but it continues to start to gain some steam, get more information. You start to learn more about it and this warning, potential threat, etc. And then you get to this impact point. So this is the impact point of these 6 phases would be the shortest phase that's occur. But the impact point would be pop when everything really just uh, has that extreme point, the impact point. So for instance, and that particular time can vary for each of us. I would say for myself, that impact point would be right around March 17, March 18, where the university I'm at decided everybody, you got to go home. Everybody off campus and sent everybody home. We talked about on our campus senior staff move out day as people were packing things up and all going home. That's the impact point. All right. So the impact point can lead to feelings of shock, panic, a crisis, all of that. People trying to figure out what to do. But that's your shortest phase. Next, after that, you go into this heroic phase. So your heroic phase is characterized by a lot of activity, a lot of action, almost kind of some hypomanic activity. But for instance, it may have been trying to figure out how to do all parts of your job, all parts of the center or location that you work at, and doing everything remotely. Technology focus, a treatment operation, answering phones, anything and everything. How do we do all parts of our work remotely in that way? So there's a lot of action in that way. I think about how we shifted everything in about a 4-day period to go from in person to remote, just like that. So you have a lot of activity, a lot of people, a lot of altruism, a lot of people. How can I help? And trying to figure everything out. So you get that situated in that action oriented heroic phase, and that leads to this honeymoon phase. So this is the point where there's a shift in emotion and people are actually feeling positive. Okay, we did it. We got through. We figured out what we're going to do and how we're going to make it through this. Okay. So the honeymoon phase is usually not that long, but it reminds me, for instance, a lot of campuses going back to 2020 in March, typical spring break time, a lot of campuses just increase spring break for an extra week. Students leave, we're going to give you an extra week. And people were thinking, okay, 2 weeks and we'll all come back and it'll be fine. But that didn't happen because things started to get worse. That then leads into this disillusionment phase. This is the longest phase. And if you look at the chart here, this is where emotions start to really move downward, emotional lows. This is where people really start to struggle because the realization sets in that this isn't going to be a short term. This is not just going to be um, problematic for everyone. All right, I'm seeing a question. Is the speaker connection bad for everyone? I'm not getting any other messages that other folks aren't hearing me, so I'm going to keep going. Um, but this disillusionment phase is when there's more struggles emotionally, more struggles with how people are doing. Um, it can lead to things happening, and this can go months and months and months in that way. You see increase in substance use happening, increase in substance abuse happening, and it really gets negative because people are not having an endpoint. When is this going to end, this disaster? In this example, when is COVID going to end? Now you notice these trigger events, it goes up and down here. So while this is going on, other things in the world continue to happen. So if you think back to that time, there was George Floyd being killed. There was a very contentious presidential election. There was the Jan 6 insurrection. All those different trigger points happen. And when those things are happening on top of the struggles with the pandemic going on, you can see what that does emotionally to folks. All right. This then leads to your last phase, which is reconstruction. You notice here it says up to about 1 year after anniversary. I'm someone who believes very strongly in the importance and accuracy of language. So the one point I would disagree with here, the word anniversary to me is a celebration, relationship anniversary, work anniversary. So I would think more of like a 1 year marker, 1 year milestone in that way. Because I don't know that it's always about celebrating. But the reconstruction is then moving into your new normal. So that's about, and you'll see this working through the grief, coming to terms with things that may have lost, people who may have been lost, as there were so many people who died across this pandemic, but working through that. So I think creating this new normal is not about forgetting what happened, but rather how do we move forward in that way after having gone through this. And while this talks about up to 1 year, you know that this has gone on for a number of years. Here we are into 2023 and kind of moving forward. And we're in a different place now in higher ed and in society where we're not in the same place as we used to be. I think about the times on my campus where students were taking a COVID test on a weekly basis. We're well away from that, but it's just shifted into where we've arrived and as we continue to move forward today. All right. So so as we work into creating this new normal, there are things that have happened from the past that we will continue to carry forward. I think telehealth has changed things. You know, I was saying to Jessica and Chris before we got started, uh, I'm a high context communicator, and I would prefer to be sitting in the same room with all of you as we go through this. But you cannot beat the logistics of Zoom. You can't. Zoom logistics are amazing in that way. It saves time, it saves efficiency, all those types of things. And if you work somewhere and you're part of a team, wherever you are, I don't think that Zoom helps staff cohesion because I think what we lose is that in-person connection in that way, or the chit chat or in-person interactions you might have in the middle of the day, the start of the day, and those types of things. You jump on a Zoom meeting and there's 10, 15 people in there. Are people really having side dialogues? Maybe, maybe not, versus what they might be doing if you're sitting in a room in that way. But there are positives that telehealth has brought us, and I think it's going to remain in a lot of ways. On the recruitment and retention side, it's really about, I can tell you in terms of how you look at recruiting folks, how you look at retention of folks is impacted because more and more you got people who want some remote work as a part of their day-to-day job. And if that's not a possibility, that may not be something that they're looking at. So it's this piece of kind of reconstructing professions are looking at work differently in that way. Um, it's the individual impacts, that's kind of a center of it, but looking at the individual impacts. So, if you're in this role and in this job of supporting students, many times over the last few years, what you've had to do is support students impacted by the pandemic while you're also personally impacted by the same pandemic. This, I think, is a hole in the literature, a gap, maybe is a better way to put it. So, for instance, say there was Hurricane Katrina, or something hits New Orleans, and you happen to be a mental health provider, maybe work for the Red Cross, and you get deployed, and you're in Ohio, but you get deployed and you go down there and you help people who lost their home and belongings, and then you come back. We have research on the providers who go there and help and come back, and what was the impact on them. The miss is, I live in New Orleans, I work for the Red Cross, I lost my home, but my job is to help people who've lost possessions. What's the impact on me helping people who are also impacted in the same way I am by this, major disaster? And I think that's part of what COVID was. When you're working in higher ed, you're doing support, you're helping students, while simultaneously, some of what they're struggling with are the exact same things you have struggled with. And as we talked about, the increase in challenges or increase in stress on the job, that could be that tipping point. And I think these different things led to some of these, what I might call existential stressors or that meaning purpose. And I think folks started looking, and again, not just higher ed, but I think more, broadly than that, looking at work differently. Why am I doing this? What does work mean? Do I want to continue to do this? there's a shift. I think there was a shift in, how and what and thoughts that people had and what they value as a part of their day-to-day work. Um, and part of that related to people leaving positions, people leaving jobs. I think we've all heard about and read about the Great Resignation and where that really kind of had an impact in different workplaces. And we talk about individual impacts. But your center or your place of employment, if people left and there was a struggle with hiring folks, well, did the resultant work get redistributed to those of you who are still there? So that's an individual impact on the work. If you were already struggling or feeling high stress and now there's extra work that has to be picked up, that was a challenge in that way as well, you know? All right, next slide. So I think across higher ed, and this is greater than, that increase in student anxiety and need, that's not a new finding. We can go back and look at, anxiety being the number one presenting concern that students come to a counseling center with. That shift started around 2007, 2008. Anxiety overtook depression. I don't think that's a surprise for any of you to hear that. But students have greater needs. That's been happening. And I think, that pandemic had that impact on students, was a crisis point, is it a chronic, and all of that as well. But the resultant impact is not just on the students, but like I'm saying, the impact on staff and faculty who are there working with students as well. And even as we've come through this, the previous academic year, one thing I saw with our incoming cohort of first year students, there was great, and I saw this across our campus and talking with colleagues at other campuses, there was a greater impact of transition to campus, almost like this strong resurgence of homesickness. So, and I think that was a pandemic effect because we had a group of students coming out of high school where for the last couple of years it was, isolate, go to school, go back home, 6 foot distancing, like back and forth, back and forth. And then when they came to a campus where everything was all back in person, living together, they kind of really had a strong reaction and kind of freaked out. A few weeks went by, they settled in, and it went on their way. But that first month, the adjustment got more challenging. Boundaries, I think, in employment and your work settings can be more diffuse. If you're doing remote work, where does the workday stop? Where does it end? Where's your commute? Is it walking, from a bedroom into a workroom and your commute is 10 steps versus having that separation and all that? And I think, this other thing that's come up is probably everybody has different things of how you've had to address Zoom and manage other behaviors now. It could be with students, it could be with others, but the things that, there's a lot of things that people have seen in Zoom sessions, Zoom meetings that they didn't expect to. There are differences that have happened because of what we're dealing with and managing based on the impact over the last few years. So, one of the things that can happen and the impact on each of us is this concept of burnout. And so this is where we're talking about exhaustion. And I don't just mean physical exhaustion, but feeling emotionally exhausted, where you're not feeling able to recharge. That increased irritation, annoyance. If you find that, if you find yourself being more snippy, and again, I don't just mean professionally, but I mean personally, it's always a sign to me on that increased irritation if someone, says to you, you know, "You seem more irritable lately." And the response is, "No, I'm not." If you jump, if you just pop at someone, what's that telling you? Where your reaction or the reaction of another person is stronger than you would anticipate. The work being more draining. That negative perspective is, if I'm having, thinking, we talk about the negative triad, but thinking negatively about self, other in the world, just a negative perspective on myself, on others, the world, the job, but just like leading with a negative focus. That's an impact. That lack of control is where when folks are feeling like there's nothing in the workplace that I feel like I can control, and that the struggles that I'm having are outside of my control. The last point on there that I think is one that people can miss is feeling ineffective at your job can very well be a sign of burnout. So, if there are tasks that you've routinely done as a part of your job, maybe tasks that you've done for years, part of your job that you've done for a long while, and all of a sudden you find yourself questioning, oh, am I doing this well? And you've done that for a long time, that can be a sign of burnout. So if you're questioning yourself, that's something to pay attention to. Compassion fatigue. So this is when you have that emotional physical exhaustion, but it leads to a decreased ability to feel empathy or compassion. So this actually, this concept was first researched in nurses and other healthcare professionals, but I think it's applicable to the work in higher ed. So this is where you get to this point where you're just not able to feel empathy and not able to refuel. I think the more work you do supporting students who have experienced crisis or traumatic situations, the more this can lead to this exhaustion you may feel as one in the helping profession and trying to support your students. So if it's again not just about can't refuel, but also about I'm feeling numb if that's what it is for you. If you're feeling numb, that can be a sign of this compassion fatigue as well. Finally, these concepts of anxiety or depression, there's no, I mean, we've had so much discussion over the last few years about vaccination. There's no vaccine for anxiety or depression. There's no immunity. These are concepts that can impact all of us. We talk a lot. I talked earlier about anxiety in students. Anxiety, number one presenting concern, depression, number two. But all of us who work in higher ed can also experiencing these things. These are things that will impact your professional work as well as your personal relationships. It makes it harder to maximize your potential. When you're finding, that less enjoyment of life is, are you not having joy? If you think about, the last few weeks of your life, were there moments where you experienced true joy? And if you weren't, what is that telling you? And with anxiety, when we think about anxiety and think about worries, the bulk of what we worry about, if you think about the things that you worry about, almost everything that we're worried about either happened in the past or has not yet occurred. The things we worry about, they're already behind us or they're in the future. This is where we talk about mindfulness and being in the moment because worry and concern is usually about one or the other. But these are things that can impact us professionally and personally, and they need to be addressed so you can imagine and help yourself professionally and personally. All right. So I'm going to shift. I don't want to be a downer in the middle of your day, but now we're going to start talking about resiliency. All right. And ways in which we can address this, some of the struggles, the challenges, the stressors, on the job, professionally, personally. All right. So here's a definition of resiliency. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but it's the process of adapting well in the face of this adversity. Uh, And then the second part, it means bouncing back from difficult experiences. Research has shown that resilience is ordinary, not extraordinary. People commonly demonstrate resilience. The point is this, all of us are capable of being resilient. This is not some, super ordinary characteristic. It is a characteristic. It's on a continuum, but we can all do it. It's important to figure out how it works effectively for you. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned our two boys are college students now, but my younger son is in fifth grade, and at that point in time, he was um, okay. So he was playing guitar lessons, viola as well, played basketball, soccer, and he was a kindergarten buddy, which meant every morning when he got to school, then he had to go greet a kindergartner, get them off the bus, and get them to the classroom. So he was involved in all these activities. He comes to us and says, I want to try out for the swim team this coming summer. Okay, you sure? Yes, fine. So we go. He tries out for the swim team. You have to swim all 4 strokes. He didn't know how to do that. So he make the team. They cut him. Fine. I don't care whether he's on the swim team or not. But he said, I want to work on this and try it again next year. So we found a swim coach, and through the winter time, bundled up, went to some indoor pool, and he took a lesson, on a weekly basis. And if you've ever been in an indoor pool in the wintertime, the humidity is off the charts. So sitting in there for, a few months, the next summer comes, we go, take him back to tryouts, and I'm thinking, please let this child make the team. He swims all 4 strokes, he makes the team. At the end of the swimming season, he gets an award for most improved swimmer. Fantastic. Awesome. My point is this. That is a 5th grader demonstrating resilience. He had enough activities going on, whether he's on a swim team or not, doesn't matter. I didn't care. My wife didn't care. It was fine. But he got knocked down. I want to do this. Put the effort in, went, took the lessons, and joined the team, and it was successful. But that is a school age child being resilient. So we can all be resilient. So I look at 4 concepts here: self-care, resilience, grit, and treatment. You will need all 4 to be most effective in your workplace, professionally, and be most effective personally. You don't need all 4 every single day. Times, context changes. So here's my quick and easy definition for each of these. Self care is what do you do on a regular basis so you don't fall down? Resiliency is what do you do when you fall down to get back up? Grit is suck it up and do it. And treatment is your own personal counseling. Okay. Research is clear. Everybody has at least one, usually more than one point in their lives where they would benefit from counseling. Not everybody goes, but everybody has that point. The other thing I want to highlight: resilience and grit have to be differentiated because we have folks in our culture, in our society, specifically people of color, who've gotten the message through their lives. Well, you just need to work harder. You need to like pull yourself up and put in extra effort. That's not resilience. That is grit. Grit is suck it up and do it. And that is not resilience. Everybody is capable of doing grit. But the thing is, when you do grit, it's got to be in short spans, short term. You cannot, our students can't grit their way through the whole fall semester, but they're going to engage in grit, many of them, during a finals week. They're not going to eat like they normally do, sleep, or do the things that they do to relax because they're studying. So they can do that for finals week, but they can't do that for the month of November and December. When you're in grit, it takes a hit on your overall well being. So it is about looking at those 4 different factors and what you need. And many times, so no matter what you do for a living, your job at some point is going to knock you over. You're going to fall down. It's okay. It happens. What are you doing to get back up? The goal can't be, I'm never going to get knocked down, because you will get knocked down. That's okay. But when you get knocked down, what are you doing to get back up? And the self-care is the things that you're doing on a regular basis to try to lessen that. Or when you do get knocked down, you're not knocked down as hard. So that you're doing things on a regular basis to take care of yourself. And the resilience piece is what you're doing to get yourself back up in that way. I've talked about the work has changed. I've talked about that already today. But this continuum is that, for each of us, finding where we are on that continuum of resilience. When you think about like a high stress time on a job, I bet you all know some folks who they thrive in that. It gets really busy and hectic, and they're just like really into it, and they're performing at a high level. There's other people who, oh, I don't like the way that feels, and I want to get things done in advance. Either way is fine. What you have to understand, what is your style? Where do you perform the best, and understand that importance for you? That is how you get from surviving to thriving. So in the workplace, you're not just surviving, but you're thriving going through that in that way. All right. So, yeah. So let me talk about this model of resiliency. This was developed by Greg Eels, a friend of mine, colleague of mine, who passed away 4 years ago now. But I continue. We had presented on this model together. He knows I loved his model. I continue to use his model because I really enjoy it. These, if you focus on these factors, it will help improve your ability to be resilient. So the SAVES is the acronym. All right. So number one is social connection. We are interpersonal beings having social connection. Again, I'm not talking about introvert or extrovert, right? And we all know that that's about energy. Extrovert, Yahoo extrovert like me gets energized by interacting with people. Okay, someone's a strong introvert, that's fine. And their energy can be from activities they do in solitude. But having that social connection is still important. If you have a BFF in the workplace, your work satisfaction goes up, your retention on the job goes up. If you have that person that you work with, or someone, in your work profession where something positive happens, who do I want to chat with this about professionally? Or there's a stressor, and who do I want to bounce this around? Having that person is helpful. Having social connection is really important and helps us to be resilient. This was a challenge for everybody in different ways when the pandemic hit because we all had to disperse, spend time away from each other. And so it was about finding different ways to be socially connected. Attitude. This is about the mindset that we take. What is the mindset that you take going into a situation? Because the mindset you take going in, or my mindset about a situation, is going to impact my experience of it. Am I taking a positive mindset in? Am I taking a negative mindset? Am I laissez-faire? What is my mindset going in? Even if it's going to be a stressful situation, how am I going in? Am I going in thinking this is going to be really awful versus how can I be most effective at this? So this is even before you enter situation. The other thing I think with attitude is focusing on gratitude. An attitude of gratitude can be incredibly beneficial. There is research that highlights gratitude helps one's own self, uh, how you're feeling, helps your own mood. I think one of the things we lost over the last few years was an emphasis on gratitude, on being thankful, on being gracious, on experiencing and expressing gratitude. I think it's something as a culture, as a society, we need to reclaim. A very easy thing you can do here is starting each day. I used to say write it down, but with your, iPhone or your Google phone, you can make a note on your phone. And what are three things I feel grateful about to start this day? They don't have to be life altering. I feel grateful that it's not going to rain today. I'm looking out the window and it's pretty overcast, but whatever it might be for you, right? They don't have to be these huge things. But what are three things you're feeling good about? Starting your day with that positive attitude, positive mindset. Values. Um, being in touch with what are the things I value in life? What are the things I value professionally? What are the things I value personally? And where am I with those things? And this could be so many different things about you value at work, things that you value personally. It could be relationships, it could be spirituality, it could be the type of work you're doing. Am I in touch with the values, the things that I value? Are they a part of my life right now? Is that there? So it's not, it's about reminding yourself what you value, being in touch with those. And if I've gotten astray from this, or, I really value X and this isn't really a part of my life right now, what adjustments can I make? Being clear and focusing on the things you value also will help you to be resilient. So, emotions. I think this is not just about um, I always have to be upbeat and positive and in a good state of feeling. This is also about understanding and being in touch with what you're feeling in the moment. Understanding about how you're feeling and being in touch with that because that impacts other parts of your world professionally and personally. So I will tell you that one example I always use with our students is I'll talk about anger and I'll tell them anger is just another emotion. The goal cannot be don't get angry because that's not realistic. Everybody gets angry. It's fine. Okay. Because when you're angry, think about what people say to you. If you're angry, what do people say to you? And usually someone will say, calm down. And if I'm angry and someone says calm down, that probably makes me more irate. It's not as if I never thought of that. Oh, what a great suggestion. I hadn't thought that calming down would be helpful. But the thing is, with anger, you know, experiencing anger isn't why people have difficulty. It's what you do when you're angry. That's the key. So when you're experiencing an emotion, what are you doing with that emotion? What's the behavior that comes with it? I'm experiencing this emotion, and what am I doing? It's the behavior that can cause some challenges. So yes, we want to focus on how we can shift to feeling more positively, but I'm also saying the goal isn't just feeling positively all the time. If you're not feeling positively, are you in touch with that? And what actions are you taking to adjust that? Okay. Silliness. Last thing is humor. Just, for me, if I don't have a good laugh, every day, that says to me that I'm having a more stressful day on the job. There should be something that just cracks me up. There are so many examples of this. I don't know, how many memes or little videos might you get sent or see on a daily basis? But where are you finding the humor? And if you're not finding the humor, I think that's telling. If you're in a meeting or something, or someone shares a joke or funny comment, if everybody is laughing and you're not, what's that telling you? You know? And looking for humor in the silliness in Greg's model here. So I go back to when we started, back in 2020, and we're doing staff meetings virtually, and we have a big department, and this is when everybody was back home, and we had a number of people, who were trying to parent and come to staff meeting, a little kid sitting on their laps and joining staff meeting. Fine, great, let's do it. At that point, uh, our boys were in high school, so I invited them to sit on my lap. It wasn't that they were never going to do that. It was how offended they were that I asked them to sit on my lap for a staff meeting on the computer. So the next week, I would ask them again. Why? Because I thought it was funny, you know? All right. But my point is, you can find silliness in little things. It doesn't have to be the funniest thing, but focusing on these factors will help you and increase the resilience that you experience. So again, it's not just about doing things on a regular basis so you don't fall down. It's also about when you fall down, what are you doing to get back up? And these factors, focusing on these in your life will help you to be resilient. All right, some other strategies and tips. A lot of these I think you're all aware of, but we don't think about and we're not consciously aware of them. Sleep, exercise, nutrition. Where are we focusing on these? These are things what we all know can help us take better care of ourselves. Okay, well, I don't have time for those every single day. All right, but can you do them in shorter bursts? Remember, when you're at that moment of engaging in grit, these things fall to the wayside. So you need to have a positive rebound in that way. Setting your boundaries professionally and personally, looking at where is my stress level out and how can I set that? The acceptance, reasonable acceptance, emotional acceptance. Emotional acceptance, reasonable acceptance is accepting what you're feeling. So even if you are struggling, accepting that, not judging yourself. And then what do I do to make some adjustments? You know, what can you control? When we experience things being out of our control, professionally, personally, that increases our angst. That increases the stress we're experiencing. So look at what can I control in this way, because that can help me to feel better about it. Zoom has continued. We're on Zoom right now. I still can remember the first day when I had 5 different meetings on Zoom and my brain thought it was going to explode at the end of the day. Now, if I had 5 meetings on Zoom, I don't know that I would think anything about it. You've gone from there's Zoom fatigue, there's um, you know, Zoom stamina, and that way. But one of the things I have thought about that using all the minutes was something I said to uh, my admin years ago. Like, so we shifted from doing everything in person in meetings, and I would walk across campus, and if the meeting's at 1 o'clock, we'd wrap up at 1:45, 1:50. I'd walk back to my office for the 2 o'clock. Somehow, once we went to Zoom, every meeting became 60 minutes. I can't tell you how many times I'm in a meeting and it's 1:52. Someone says, okay, we have 8 minutes left. And I'm thinking, we don't have 8 minutes left. I want to make another cup of tea and I got to run to the restroom. But we go back to back to back to back. Control that. We don't need to go to 60 minutes every time because that causes that harried effect that you're feeling of going boom, 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 and all that way. That's using all the minutes. Don't use all the minutes. Save minutes back for yourself in between things. Thinking about that professional and personal context and how that shifts over time. Because you can't fully separate them. Remote work intertwines them in that way. And so that work and home and office place, that shift has happened. Looking at what your current reality is and what you can accept, related to what I talked about, accepting, what you're feeling emotionally and not sitting in judgment of yourself. There should be times where you're saying no, and remembering how to say that. Sometimes we struggle when we don't say no at all. If we're not able to say no, how are we adjusting to that? If I can't do this, what could I do instead? So for me, excuse me, sometimes it's, the ask comes in, I can't do that, but what am I able to do instead? You know, that learn to do nothing, I think about that from the old, I guess it's old now, Seinfeld episodes, a show about nothing. Can you do nothing? I don't mean for a whole day on a Saturday afternoon. Are you able to just have a couple hours and just be and not do anything? We've come to a place in our society where things are always on the go. Boom, 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 boom. Are you able to just sit and be and relax in that way? Being mindful of what your limits are professionally and what they are personally. Because if you're not thinking consciously about your limits, you can end up being overloaded. And then finally, that perspective is the key. Keeping in mind that gets back to the attitude, get back to values, but looking at what is the perspective I'm taking going into a situation? What is the perspective I'm taking about what's going on? Because that will impact how you experience it, how you feel about it, and what the outcome is for you. All right. Last thing is a self-care and resiliency plan. So once again, I used to say, put this on a piece of paper. Now with an iPhone, Google phone, Android phone, whatever, you can do it on there. This is a very easy thing that I think everybody should do. So self-care and resiliency plan. What you do is on your document, on the self-care side, what are 3 things I do on a regular basis so I don't fall down? On the resiliency side, what are 3 things I do when I fall down to get back up? Create this plan for yourself. There's no wrong answers, and keep it. And every couple of weeks, every month, take it back out, look at it, and where are you with that? The original one I made years ago is on a green piece of paper, sits in my computer bag, and I can look at that. Over time, you have to adjust it. Am I doing those things? What are the things I do on a regular basis so I don't fall down? And when I've fallen down, what do I do to get back up? What I find is things on the self-care side tend to be more social, interacting with loved ones, family, friends, etc. On the resilience side, I tend to see more solitary activities. Just being at home, unplugging, turning things off, watching Netflix. The one thing that I see crosses over both sides is sleep. That's fantastic. What do I do to take care of myself? I get more sleep, when I can. Or when I've, gotten knocked down, overstressed, I need sleep to bring myself and pop myself back up in that way. But everybody's plan is your own individualized plan. There's no wrong answers. And it's a way for you to think and be intentional about what you're going to do so you don't fall down. And then when you do fall down, how do you get back up? Because those are both very important so you can be as professionally efficient as you want and as personally maximized as you want to be in that way. Okay, so let's go to questions. I think, Jessica, I can stop sharing at this point, you think?
Absolutely, you most
Okay.
definitely can. And let me just take a moment to thank you, Dr. Sharma, for that very insightful and very informative presentation. I know there is already a question in the chat, but I do want to mention that I've already started my list of things that I am grateful for today. So again, lots of takeaways and items from your presentation. So again, thank you. I will move on to the first question, and I want to encourage everyone to feel free to use the chat and or Q&A to post any questions that you may have for Dr. Showman and/or any comment. So the first question is, there is research that highlights the burden of resiliency for Black, Latinx, and other people of color. What guidance do you provide to leaders and institutions in creating safe spaces where employees do not always have to be resilient?
Yeah. Yeah. So in this question, one thing I would start with is having this dialogue that the person or attendee is highlighting here, that the burden of resiliency and what the research indicates, how it impacts different communities in different ways. Specifically here, some BIPOC folks and what their experience is. I would also highlight, as I talked about earlier, differentiating between resilience and grit, because sometimes people are saying resilience, but what they're talking about is actually grit. So I think you have to differentiate those things as well. But the other dialogue to have is that not every situation or every job impacts all people in the same way. Who we are as individuals personally is who we are showing up professionally as. And we have to look at how we can support folks across the board. You know, the question is about how do you talk to leaders, I think. How do you, yes, leaders and institutions. If we are supporting individuals to be most effective, that will then in turn increase their productivity, increase their job satisfaction, and increase their job retention. I have to believe that those are things that are important to leaders to help individual employees be effective, be satisfied, and increase retention. Because when we lose employees or lose staff because they're unhappy in the workplace, there's a multi-tiered cost associated with that. I don't mean fiscal costs, I mean retention, recruitment, hiring, onboarding, all that. The win is to find ways to support people individually, as an overall organization.
And thank you for that response. While we were waiting on other questions to come in, I did notice that there was a question about the slides, and I would just mention, if you joined us later, that not only is this presentation being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, but the slides will also be disseminated as well. All right. Well, I am not seeing any further questions. Again, Dr. Sharma, thank you so much for that. Again, very informative and insightful presentation. A lot of takeaways I think we all can take during this time of year. And one last time, if you are looking to obtain CME and CU credits, the activity code for today, which is Chris has just posted in the chat, is 67 Lily. That is 67 LILY, and that will expire on tomorrow at 12 noon. So again, if you're looking to obtain credits, we do value your feedback either way. We also hope to see you next year, 2024, on January 30th for our next webinar. And actually, I'll leave you with a quote. It's almost like a personal quote that I look at to even examine resiliency or even how I define it. But resiliency is based on compassion for ourselves as well as compassion for others. And there's so many things that are happening around the world and perhaps in our prospective employment and higher education. And so just remember that it's based on compassion for ourselves as well as compassion for others. And that quote is from Sharon Salzberg. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time. Happy holidays, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.